Greetings, Elder Blacklight. I want you to check this out right here. I'll comment afterwards.
And this is the map done using photographs from the satellites and computers to calculate the actual dimensions and size and shape of the Earth. And so it's the most correct map in existence. But they don't use it in public schools. I mean, these people with all this notion and talk about science and technology, when there's a map that occurs that deal with Africa, and this, you see the size of Africa as regards this map versus the size of Africa as regards this map. This is the old German map that was done back in the, I guess around the 1600s. It's called the Mercator map. But when they did this, they hadn't even circumvented the globe. They were taking information from different navigators. They've sharpened it up some. But this early map, and I'll show you why I'm showing you this. If you look at Europe, or look at Asia, the Soviet Union, is 8.7 square miles. Can everybody see the two black things here? You see the Soviet Union? And how much bigger it is than Africa? Yet Africa is 11.6 million square miles versus the Soviet 8.7 million square miles. Yet on the map they have the Soviet Union as twice the size of Africa. And there's a psychology to that, right? Psychologically, the assumption is that the Soviet Union is twice the size of Africa, when indeed Africa is nearly twice the size of the Soviet Union. Let me show you one that's even more of a discrepancy. You see Greenland, which is a quite European institution, is 0.8 square miles, million square miles. But it's almost twice the size as China, which is 3.7 million square miles, 3 times the size of Greenland. So this psychology of making the northern hemisphere appear in maps that are used to teach youngsters bigger is a part of the delusion involved in white academia to mislead people using a concept that's referred to as subliminal seduction, where things are used to form your consciousness that you don't actually see. Because we have never really seen this until the second map came out. Take Alaska versus Mexico. Look at Mexico. Tiny, right? Alaska, gigantic. But Mexico is 1 million square miles bigger than Alaska. But since Alaska is the white northern hemisphere, it is projected to be the larger. Or the entire piece showing the entire northern hemisphere. If you can see, North America, Greenland, Europe. Look how big it is versus Asia, Africa, Central, South America, and Australia. Look how small it is. But the truth is, the northern hemisphere is 18.9 million square miles, while the southern hemisphere is 38.6 million square miles, twice the size plus. But the map that you see in your books, in your geography books, in your history books, and that's used in the classroom is a false projection of the northern hemisphere. And we contend that's a part of the subliminal teaching of white supremacy, imposing themselves in this kind of technical way into your consciousness as being something that it's not. One other. The equator. On the map that you currently use, the equator falls down below the top of South America and past below the Horn of Africa. But on a map calculated using satellites and computers, the equator is much higher up and falls, I think, where is it? Almost right across the desert up in Africa. So it should fall right through about here. The way they put it here, put it too, I think they made it, is that too low? Yeah, they made it too low. It should have been higher up. But that was to give the northern hemisphere more space into the south, so that they can then claim North Africa and Egypt as being a part of the northern hemisphere sphere, because much of the population in Egypt and North Africa today is a population made up of Mediterranean Europe and the Balkan European and Turkish invaders, and they're not really the indigenous people of that region. We just blanketly call everybody there Arabs, but most of the people in North Africa are not Arabs, and most of the people in Egypt are not Arabs. They're Turks, they're Yugoslavians, they're Italians, they're Greeks, they're Syrians, and those are not Arabs. They are Arabs in Egypt, but they do not make up the majority of the population biologically, even though that's what we tend to say. Just like we tend to assume that most Egyptians are Muslims. That is true, but a significant population in Egypt is Coptic Christians and do not have the same loyalty to Arab nationalism and to Islam as those who are Muslims. But we never see this play out because we stereotype everybody in the Middle East that everybody is Muslim. We even stereotype the fact that the Arabs are the dominant factor in Islam, but the largest Muslim population in the world is in Africa, second largest is Indonesia, and the third largest is in the Soviet Union. The Arabs fall as about the fifth largest Muslim population in the world, and not the first. The reason we think of them as being the large population is because Mecca is located in Saudi Arabia, and that is the center of Islamic worship.
Professor James Small running it down. Now, this is called The Bookworm Gets at the Root of the Truth. Don't let those say they scholars fool you. Coming back in a few seconds. I got to get this book. Don't go nowhere. Back in a flash. Reading from this book here, The Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Kushite Empire by Drusilla Dunjee Houston, published back in 1926. Chapter 9, The Marvelous Arabian Civilization. Arabia was one of the earliest colonies of the ancient Kushite Empire of Ethiopians. Baldwin claims that it was the original land of Kush. He says, in the oldest recorded traditions, Arabia is the land of Kush. The celebrated Ethiopians of very remote times. He continues, in ages older than Egypt or Chaldea, Arabia was the seat of an enlightened and enterprising civilization that went far into neighboring countries. At that time, Arabia was the exalted and wonderful Ethiopian of olden tradition, the center and life of what in Western Asia was known as the civilized world tradition of the ancient world, rightly interpreted, can have no other meaning. In the early traditions and recorded of Greece, in the records of Greece, in the early traditions in the records of Greece, Arabia was described as Ethiopia. You dig that? Arabia was only separated from old Ethiopia by the Red Sea. Just I want to wrap a minute before we continue. Maybe on the next video. See, when young Pharaoh was arguing with that brother, that Moore brother, he don't know nothing about that, what I just read to you. This book been around ever since 1926 by a black woman, not no white dude. Her name was Drusilla Dunjee Houston. Drusilla Dunjee Houston, 1876 to 1941. Daughter of John William and Linda Taylor Dunjee. Was a teacher, journalist, self-trained historian, and by any standard, a remarkable woman. See, now don't every so-called black scholar know about this book, because they study it from the European, and you see from Dr. James Small's video how they're misleading the young black mind. See, this is the kind of knowledge you won't get in college, unless your college has a Afro-centered curriculum. This is Black Light. Stay tuned for part 2. Remember, the bookworm digs deep, goes to the root for the truth. Black Light. Catch this vibe.